Welcome back to Earth Station Trek, a show where we trek from the early days on NBC to the future on Paramount Plus and everywhere in between. I'm Charles Kelso, and it's my privilege to introduce the Earth Station Trek crew, Keith Johnson.
Let's jack. Kick it. Into infinity. Let's just get on with the show.
Alan Seiler.
Let's fly.
And Veronica couldn't join us tonight. She had a trip to the dentist today she's still recovering from. But we're joined by two special guests. One from a host from the Enterprisesplaining podcast, Maria D'Souza.
Hello.
And from the DragonCon Trek track, Nick Wright.
I want the ship to go now.
And welcome to the show, guys. Nick, I know you've been here before. Maria, you have not. And we're going to find out more about the Enterprisesplaining podcast later on at the end of the show. But tonight we're talking about Star Trek Discovery Season 5. And since everyone has listened to us talk about it for the last 10 weeks, we thought we'd get some special guests in and get some different opinions to see where we might agree and where we might disagree. So starting off with Maria, what has been your opinion of Star Trek Discovery up to now? Have you been a fan of the show?
I have. I've been a big fan of it. Anybody who knows me knows it's not a huge surprise. I'm a giant fan of Star Trek in general, but I really loved what they did with Discovery. I loved, obviously, the diversity of it and just the different stories. But I really particularly liked how deep they went into each character and just sort of really giving you a bit of a sense for the background and the backstory for each character. And I really, really like that.
And Nick, same question.
Yeah, absolutely. I was with it from the beginning, and you have to give credit to Discovery for essentially saving Star Trek TV as it exists now. We wouldn't have anything from Star Trek if it wasn't for the Discovery. And I've been I've been one of the positive fans of Star Trek Discovery since the beginning. I have not been, obviously it's, nothing's perfect, but I've really enjoyed what they've done with it. I think it's just been high quality throughout. And, going back and doing a rewatch of it recently, I was like, wow, this really is a good show. I love what they were doing with this. And it just incensed me even further that it was canceled with, all these short seasons and then ending on the fifth one. So mixed feelings, but definitely a fan of the show.
Did you do your rewatch from the beginning all the way through?
So before this season aired, I went back and I watched the first 4 seasons.
Wow.
And then I watched this one live.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be ready for it.
I rewatched season 4 before going into 5, but that's as much as I could do.
Yeah, that's what I did as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we started a while back. Like, we knew the new season was coming out and we were like, okay, well, we got a few months before this actually has to happen. And since they're such short seasons, we didn't really have too much of a challenge doing it, unfortunately.
Right.
That's what I was going to say. It's less of a time commitment than it is watching old Trek for 4 seasons.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about like 85 episodes.
Yeah.
Well, what do we think about season 5? I mean, have you guys been enjoying it going along?
I definitely did. So I was kind of like a lot of people. I was a little over the super high stakes in every single season. It's like, okay, this is going to be a galaxy ending thing. This is going to be a world ending thing. This is going to end time. And I really liked going back and having just a nice old fashioned like treasure hunt, like a chase throughout every episode to get to something that we think is big, but might not be big. We don't really know. And it was a little more human kind of a story. And I really appreciated that about this season.
How about you, Maria?
Yeah, I thought the same. I loved the treasure hunt side of it. I thought in general, the previous season was great, but sort of heavy. Obviously with, entire planets getting blown up and this sort of dealing with grief and these huge topics. And so just having hey, let's run around and chase things and try to solve puzzles was fun. I do wish we had maybe one sort of, bottle episode. I just missed just seeing them all interact together as a crew and have and solve a particular, it was a little bit too frenetic for me, but that was really my only real quibble with it was because I like the character so much. I just wanted to see him more.
Yeah.
I feel like the closest that we did get to that was episode 4, the one where they jump into different time zones and you see Discovery throughout its history and into the future. And not that it was my favorite episode of the season, and it's also the closest that we got to seeing our well-known Discovery family all together, and that's part of why I loved it so much.
Yeah, I really also missed Oo and Detmer because of all of the
You're singing my
scheduling
song.
conflicts,
Yes.
right? I know you guys agree with me on that. It was just, it was,
Oh,
I kept every episode. I was like, no, they're still not here. Oh no.
I know.
Yeah,
Everybody
also-
on this show knows how much I love those two
Yeah,
characters.
we almost had a whole new crew with Rayner. Like you've got enough characters to create a spin-off series on their own right there.
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we didn't even get a lot of Saru this season. And I
Mhm.
feel like Tilly and Stamets were kind of their participation was kind of minimized. It really felt like a lot of them were more backseat this year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
Saru
Yeah,
got more
Right.
than
Agreed.
Yeah, Saru got more than a lot of them. Like Adira and Tal had that one breakup, and if I have any complaints about, and it's not really a complaint, it's just more like an observation about the way that the season 5 went, is that having that breakup happen the way it happened. I thought there was going to be more to it, but then I'm looking on the other hand. I'm like, you know what? It's kind of nice to see representation of people that can have a relationship, they can break up, they can still love each other, they can still care about each other. Life moves on. Cool. Let's we need to see more of that in fiction. I just was kind of expecting a little more from it.
Yeah, and especially at the age those characters are. Like TV characters, you kind of assume they're just together forever. But
Yeah.
if you 19, 20 years old, you're not necessarily going to be with your high school sweetheart for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
Now, Keith, you've been talking a lot about the Breen this year. So before we get into our opinions about the Breen, Maria, what did you think about the Breen this year?
So I'll be honest, I had very little sort of background context for the Breen. I barely remember them on Deep Space Nine. It's been so long since I watched it. I'm actually in the middle of rewatching Deep Space Nine now because it's been years and years. And I love it and I remember really enjoying it, but I don't have a ton of so I was like, they're fine. They're just sort of to me, they were just like, the big bad. They were fine. They were kind of dumb, which I know is not what they really should have been. And they were, very, I think Keith, in a previous episode, you said call them broy. I think they were super broy. But they were, it was an interesting, it's always interesting to see sort of, one member of that culture sort of break off and do their own thing, and that was kind of interesting. But yeah, they were not super compelling to me.
How about you, Nick?
So I'm much of the same mind. Sorry, Keith. But to me, the Breen have always kind of just been they've been generic bad guy race. They've literally been faceless villains, and they've been used for whatever plot we have available to them. The strongest memory I had of them before this was when they were on that planet and they were trying to rescue Goldicot's daughter. And I remember Kira running around in the Breen suit. Hopefully I'm remembering that correctly. It's been a while since I saw DS9. But yeah, I just they didn't really. They were cool, and I feel like maybe this does take some of the mystery out of it. Maybe that's the thing, but. It's not uncommon for Federation officers to get the best of a species that's been built up to be super tough and badass. But I don't think we really lost anything by defining them more. But I'm sure Keith has more of an opinion on that.
Keith, have you warmed up to the Breen at all?
What's that?
Have you warmed up to the Breen at all?
Nah, they really they're lame to me. I think the less is more is what got me. And even if again we always talk about monocultures, and so you don't want a monoculture, and I'm cool with that. But seriously, when that one Breen started babbling about the oil bath, they broke me. I mean, at that point in time, it was so. And then when they literally did it might as well. Here we go. It might as well have been an Abbott and Costello routine when they were like, "Oh, I thought you had the papers to get in. Oh, I thought you had the invitation." I'm like, this is the Breen. Are you kidding me? So I didn't realize how much I liked the Breen until they did what they did to the Breen in this series. I heard another podcaster say something very interesting talking about liking Alan's feelings about Maul and Locke are well known. And I heard a podcaster say, if they'd handled the Breen slightly better, they could have eliminated Maul and Locke altogether and just had the Breen be the antagonist for the season. And I never thought about that. That actually could have worked.
And throughout the entire season, the Breen never cared about finding the MacGuffin. They were just doing their own thing, and then they followed it because of Maul at the end. But there were, at least in the chase from Next Gen, everyone was trying to get to where they're all conspiring and sneaking and trying to get to the end of the little treasure hunt. But in this one, it's really just Discovery and then Maul and Locke looking for the treasure, and the Breen gets sort of like roped into it along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a little background research on the whole thing with the Breen, because as you know, there's been a debate for years what they are. There was one thing that there are a whole bunch of different races that were the suit so that they are united, so you can't tell. But there'd always have to be a main race. There was some people said they were lupine. There were some who said that they might be fleshless inside. Evidently, Ira Stephen Bear for DS9 argued that they were slug-like creatures inside, hence the encounter suits. But there was debate all over the place on that. So they never did settle on something. So this thing that was written by this young man who just started watching Star Trek like 3 years ago, I guess he took that from Ira Stephen Bear, and hence you had that weird, I think their native form is supposed to be the slug-like form or the flesh form, the gel form we saw. But they somehow developed the ability, we don't know if it's natural or technologically, to have a solid form like us to handle their planet's harsh climate. But then supposedly when they're doing the solid form, they're also more, we would call more civilized. And hence they kind of hate the solid form, which is why the Primarch was babbling about Locke's always wearing a human form, because that's the weak form. So they like to be in whatever that jelly form is because they're more aggressive in it. That's kind of cool. But other than that,
yeah, but hardly any of that was ever even on screen, and none of it mattered by the end. Like,
absolutely,
it was just, like, something they hinted at halfway through the season and then just never brought up again.
Yeah.
I read
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I read an article about the very first time that they were shown, which I think was Deep Space Nine. I can't remember, but
yeah.
And the creator was like, the reason that they put them in those masks was that he just didn't feel like making another alien head face. They just wanted something. Something. And I was like, right. So this is very well thought through. Then.
Right. What were you
kind of reminded me of what Lower Decks did with the Orions. Like the Orions were not very well defined, and Lower Decks came in and it's like, hey, we're going to give these people culture. We're going to like have characters that are examples of things that are not typical of Orions. We're going to like have the deal with the superstitions around them, deal with their reputation, and we're going to explore that culture and do more with it. So, you know, Lower Decks did for the Orions what Discovery's doing for Breen, I guess.
Yeah, but I felt like it was more effective on Lower Decks because for one, it paid off at the end, but it also involves one of the main characters. But also the Orions actually had motivations and interest in what was going on, whereas the Breen, they're just sort of, it's like a bunch of stormtroopers that just start following Maul.
Yeah. I guess also Strange New World kind of did that with the Gorn, or at least tried to, although they were somewhat monolithic as well.
Yeah.
There's another one.
Y'all just hit. I know. Y'all just hit my high voice tonight.
My precious baddies.
Next thing you're gonna start talking about Kirk and S&W.
Well, Nick, did Maul and Locke grab you over the course of the season?
You know, I liked Maul and Locke. I mean, I'm a sucker for romance, and like, I liked them running around and like, you know, being like this criminal like Bonnie and Clyde type element, but not really being bad guys. If they killed somebody, they probably deserved it. But then like halfway through it, I'm like, oh, this ain't gonna end well for these guys. That kind of that sucks. I realized that before anything, you know, any severe injuries happen to anybody, and I'm like, yeah, this the tone of this story. It ain't gonna end well for these two. But you know, I found them entertaining, and I was not one of the people who were complaining when we got that, you know, backstory about how they met and how they started to fall in love and everything. I was enjoying it.
Yeah. What about you, Maria?
Yeah, I liked that as well. I thought that it was nice that they actually showed us the backstory so we could actually see some sort of motivations beyond those. I don't know. My suspicion is that they were going to keep Maul on for next season, just because of her connection with Book. It just felt like that was what they were setting up. I also think that just in general, Discovery has this overarching theme of like great loss, like losing everything and then coming back from it. And you see it over and over and over again. And that's sort of what Maul went through at the end of this season, and what, you know, presumably what next season would be, what how she kind of got past that, maybe. Yeah. But yeah, that was sort of my thoughts.
Okay, so would you envision her of like just being a recurring character or being like on the crew?
I sort of thought she'd be a recurring character, sort of the way, the way Book was in that, and I mean, I guess Book in this season and the last sort of came in for constantly, but kind of bring her in as sort of consultant as needed, because she's a courier as well, right? So like just having somebody who has that flexibility to do stuff that's not quite Starfleet sanctioned is always a useful person to have around.
I think it would make sense if she were kept around for the following season because of her connection with Book, because they really didn't have the opportunity to explore that in any kind of real or meaningful way in this season. So it seems likely that would have been a continuing plot line from this point on, had there been a continuation.
Yeah.
There was definitely more to explore when thinking about the predecessor of Cleveland Booker. Like, who was the previous Cleveland Booker? Like, who was her dad? What was he like? We didn't get to see him. We got a little more detail about him in this season, and I feel like they really could have expanded that if they kept her around for the next one.
Yeah. I think she would have. I think she would have been perfect. And I read some stuff to indicate that she would have been a perfect Section 31 type agent, because ironically, the main people we see involved with outfits like Section 31 have been really moral people, whether you're going all the way back to Malcolm Reed and Enterprise, or Dr. Bashir. Remember the episode of Deep Space Nine? They even sent O'Brien undercover with the Orion Syndicate. And it's weird because you get these really moral people who always have a problem doing the job. And I think she would be perfect for Section 31. And I think that's what they were kind of sort of hinting at they were going to do if they had the additional 2 seasons they were expecting to have. It's funny. I like the actress and I like the character, but I think as Alan pointed out, she just never felt as big as they portrayed her. And that's just weird. It's almost like I don't mean this in a negative way. It's almost like she's a more minor character in a major story. And so I kind of didn't buy them. I buy them as the thieves. I buy them as the couriers. I buy them as that. I didn't buy them in this cosmic level thing. It's weird. And I guess for me, it didn't quite mesh. But I like her as a character. I'd love to see her back.
Yeah, I think she could have been fleshed out more, for sure.
Yeah, I think I liked Ball and Locke more towards the beginning when they were doing more of the Bonnie and Clyde type stuff, like you're talking about, Nick. Then, especially after she lost Locke and then got involved with the Breen, she became more just like Vendetta, like she's in charge of the evil. It was more fun with them running around and running and gunning and being in love, for me.
Yeah.
Well, like this is the final. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Charles.
I was just going to this being the final season of Discovery, whether they planned it or not. I mean, Maria, how did you think that it worked as a last season?
Yeah, I think it worked great. I mean, I think it was it showcased, where they were. I think, I had a few quibbles, like I had with the entire show, a few quibbles, but overall, I think they did a good job. It was very clear that end cap was an end cap that they, came back in and did. And I would have liked to have seen that go in a slightly different direction, probably. But I overall, I thought it was, it was such a fun season, and it was such a, like I said, I love puzzles and I love the whole Indiana Jones feel to it, that I just, always enjoyed. So I thought overall it did well, and they found what they needed to find. And sort of closed out on a positive, which I thought was really good. Like I said, my biggest concerns were my biggest issues were that there were, like, the whole crew wasn't there, and that made me sad.
Right. Well, what about you, Nick?
So, as I've mentioned, I love this season, but I think if I was going to be able to plan it out, I would say last season would have been a better last season for the show, because the stakes were so epic. Like, I really appreciate getting back down to doing this treasure hunt. And that I think, was something that I wish we'd had more of leading up to this. But just thinking about it from a narrative perspective, you can lead up to the DMA, lead up to that climax where it's like world killing, all this like major stuff. And that would have been like a really powerful one to go out on. I do feel like if they had another season, they would have probably gone more, raised the stakes a little bit more. And then, like, when they go out, just really just power it home. And maybe they could have done something with Calypso that I like what they did at the end of the last episode. But I do feel like we kind of missed something by not being able to have that expanded into a whole season where they could have done something else that would have been more complete. So yeah, I think it would have, if it had been able to continue, it would have just gotten back up into those high stakes and would have felt more like it was supposed to be there at that point.
Yeah, I actually I did not like what they did with the Calypso part of it. I feel like it felt really tacked on. It felt like an afterthought, and it just raised more questions than it answered. And I just felt like it. I mean, I understand why they did it because they wanted to close the loop, but it felt tacked on, and it felt sad. It was like, God, you're sending the sentient ship out to just sit around alone for however many years. I mean, it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
And she's like, I just haven't watched Calypso like literally like half an hour ago before the show. Like she was struggling about whether or not she was a person. She didn't think she was a person at that point. And it's like, I feel like she was at a different level before that 1,000 years waiting out in the middle of nowhere for nothing. And like, she's had some time to kind of let her mental state degrade a bit. And it is kind of sad. It's like, why would you sentence her to that? Did she volunteer for that?
Right.
But I don't know. It's a question of, I feel like they wanted to make sure that you knew that they didn't forget about it, but they also didn't have the time to really devote to doing it as well as they would like to have.
It kind of felt like this was where they always had intended to do this. They always had intended to connect those dots, but they didn't expect to do it now.
Yeah.
So they're like, holy cow, we got to get it in there somehow. We would have done it in season 7, but now we have to do it. And it's like, it just felt kind of awkward. Like it didn't feel like a natural thing.
Yes.
I had a good friend of mine call me today because he always calls me and asks me about the show, and he knows nothing about Calypso. And he said, "So is Zora going to go mad and come back and destroy everybody for leaving her alone for several centuries?" So, like, dude, I don't know. I guess not.
Right.
Yeah, it came up in our Earth Station Trek discussion group on Facebook before this aired about what was the deal with Calypso, and it was suggested maybe it could have been an alternate universe. And then I had the thought, like, well, that might have been something I would have enjoyed more than the Mirror Universe Enterprise, was if they found like an alternate universe Discovery where it's the Calypso Discovery, and I don't know, tied it in that way instead of trying to do it because they didn't have time at the end to set it up in a way that made sense, so they left it a mystery.
Yeah,
Right.
and I feel like they could have just left it a mystery without, they could have even just not referenced it at all and said, this is something way in the future. And, maybe referenced it in one of the later, like in the section 31 or in, one of the later things, but I just didn't feel like it was necessary.
Yeah.
Right. Because they went to the degree of having to alter the ship to make it look like it did in Calypso, when there's absolutely no reason in story for them to have done that.
Right.
They only did it for production reasons, not for story reasons, and it just makes no sense.
Yeah.
Was it supposed to be like the what was it, season 2 where they did the time jump, or season 3? Was it supposed to be there that happened?
No,
Where
I don't think so.
She was left waiting for, like, the crew somehow moved forward in time, and she was left. And
that's what I was thinking was going to happen.
Yeah, well, I suspect that when they came up with Calypso, they had a different plan for the ending of season 2 before the change in showrunners happened. The showrunners got fired like 4 episodes into season 2, and they sort of changed their plan. But I think, I don't know this for a fact, but I think the original plan was that the crew would jump forward in time and the ship would wait for them. And then when that didn't happen, you're left with this dangling thread. But I will say, though, I did really enjoy the visual of the classic Discovery sailing away with honors at the end of the show. Whether it made a lot of sense or not, I did like seeing that happen, though.
Fair enough.
There's a couple of things that they brought up in that like 3rd season when we first got to the future. People were calling it Vidraish, and they mentioned Vidraish and Calypso, and I'm like, okay, so they're gonna lose the idea of the Federation. And they're going to start calling it Vidraish by the time in Discovery's time now. And then they're going to sit it out for another 1,000 years. And the Federation's going to disappear, and they're going to call it Vidraish again 1,000 years from now. It's like, or at some point undetermined in the future. So there's some things that didn't line up. Also, I noticed that Zora said that she spent some time evolving herself. And I feel like in the original idea for Calypso, I think it was just, she just went out there as a regular ship computer. Right. And then over 1,000 years naturally evolved to have her own personality, and you really, become fleshed out as an entity. So that was some things like, I feel like they picked a little bit from Calypso going into the third season, but they didn't take it as much as face value. They just like took little ideas and peppered them in.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What were you about to say, Alan? I thought we were about to start talking at the same time.
It's
okay.
One
thing I was going to say about the whole. Oh, go ahead, Alan. Sorry.
No, it's
somebody go.
Right.
Now, one thing I was going to say about the whole Calypso Zora thing is it actually makes sense to me that they would do that, because one, not criticism, but critique I've had of the entire series with the showrunners is they are, to my opinion, they were a little bit too concerned sometimes with tying things together, connecting things, callbacks, almost fan service stuff. We're not going to bring up Gorn and all this kind of stuff again, but the Keepers of the New Flame, I think sometimes they are a little loath to leave things hanging. Like we say, sometimes, like I really prefer that you flesh out a universe, but even I sometimes say you don't have to connect every single thing sometimes. That seems to be a tendency with almost all the new showrunners for all the new shows, whether it's the Tribble showing up for the billionth time or, wedging in certain characters that don't necessarily need to be there. So I wasn't a little surprised. It is so funny. Charles last week asked me, had I seen Calypso? And I sat there and I said, yeah. And then I realized I haven't seen Calypso. So I realized I hadn't seen it. And so I was completely lost too. And I think sometimes if someone hadn't seen the short track, I think you shouldn't have to have seen the short track to kind of understand what that was. So I realized that was why I was confused. I had not seen Calypso.
Mm-hmm. That makes me think that too. Like, for instance, Maria, you guys are doing an Enterprise watch along podcast, and you're only like 10 episodes in. So when Kovich announced that he's actually crewman Daniels, what impact did that have on you?
Yeah, so I was like, well, is that because that's Enterprise is the one Star Trek that I've not seen.
Right.
So we are watching it brand new, this 20-year-old show. But we just watched Cold Front, which is where Agent Daniels shows up. So cool. Yeah, so it tied in really, really well for us. And I was like, oh, I know who that is.
I get that reference.
Yeah, but of course, at the end of Cold Front, Agent Daniels, quote unquote, dies. And I was like, oh, yes, he didn't die, which, you kind of knew he wasn't actually dead.
Right.
I thought it was neat to have that tie back to Enterprise of all things, which I would not have expected at all. So yeah, it's fun.
What about you, Nick? Were you a fan of Enterprise, and did that work for you?
I did, but and I think it was last episode. Somebody was like, "Oh God, I was hoping it wasn't going to be like Wesley Crusher or somebody." I'm glad that they picked somebody like Daniels, who was somebody that that works. I can accept that. If you're gonna, it didn't feel like it was 100% tacked on. And I haven't had a chance to go back and watch Enterprise, but I hear that like the way that Cronenberg acts is very similar to the way Daniels was being portrayed. It's just kind of like, you can imagine that character aging, and this is what he becomes in the future, and getting a little more surly and Cronenberg-esque. I thought it was neat. They do have a tendency, as we were saying, to try to cram too many references in, but that one I wasn't mad at.
Yeah. I'm kind of like what Keith was saying, where I like nerd references. Don't get me wrong. I like the Trekkie references, but I do get a little worn out on them, especially given the last several seasons of Star Trek that we've had that are very dependent on Trekkie nerd references. But I think if you're going to pick a Star Trek character for him to be, then Daniels makes more sense than probably anybody else.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. For sure.
I usually I get up before work on Thursdays to watch the show because I don't get a chance to otherwise, and I have to see it before we do our podcast on Thursday nights. And Charles gets up like at least 2 hours earlier than I do, because he gets up super early. And so I know he's already seen it. So as I'm watching it, I'll sometimes just drop him a text. And I think when I was watching this one, I just sent him a text that said, Agent Daniels, in all caps.
And Charles responded, Enterprise is lame.
I blocked it. No, one morning, Alan sent me a text that just said, the Red Angel.
Oh yeah, in episode 4 when
Right.
it looked like when they did the time jump back to season 2, and I thought, holy cow, are they going to work the Red Angel into this thing? But it wasn't really.
No. Yeah.
It ended up being even better than I thought it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a lot of references this year to like previous seasons of Discovery, just generally throughout the season. And I'm wondering if maybe they didn't know it was the final season, but maybe they were like suspecting, because there's an awful lot of calling back to the earlier days on the show and different things coming back, and especially that Face the Strange episode where it's like it's like Shattered, but for Discovery, which is the Voyager episode, where they revisit different time periods of the show itself. But I thought this season actually worked really well for a final season. I think even they made a point of sort of resolving everyone's character arcs at the end in some way.
Yeah,
well, I say everyone who's on the show still.
From what I've seen and from what I've read, Charles, I think I agree with you. And what they were doing was they thought they were going to get 2 more seasons, but what they did was they were taking everybody to the arc where they had finished their arcs. Like we talked about the contrast. Michael Burnham was this cold Vulcan-like person when she started, and then by the end she's extremely emotional. There was the whole will they, won't they with Book, and now she's finally. And as we all know, Star Trek and couples is a real dicey thing. And they finally decided that they were going to be together. You had Culber and Stamets come to peace with whatever they've been through. So what I've read and what I've also gleaned from this season was it was an ending for the character arcs we've seen for 5 years. And then season 6 was going to be something different, whether that was going to be very serious or very episodic, like whether they become more like agents and adventures of the week. So they really were getting ready to have like a new phase for these people, but unfortunately they didn't get a chance. So it does come off as a good ending. Unfortunate, because I would have loved to have seen them do more with that next season or 2.
Me too. Absolutely. I'm real mad about it.
Yeah, and as much as I miss seeing the familiar faces on the ship, I mean, it's kind of a cliche of Star Trek at this point that everyone's sort of chained to their post for decades at a time.
Yes.
Like there's no way Commander Data would serve at that same post for 15 years in real life,
right.
But at least on Discovery, I mean, whether we like to see people go or not, I mean, different people on the ship just get new postings and move on and get better jobs and promotions and things like that.
I agree.
The show, you've got almost a whole different bridge crew.
Sure.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I used to say about TNG every week, Picard said Riker was the best in the fleet. And he was always first officer. And the series started with Troy saying we broke up because he wants to be a starship captain. And then he sits on the Enterprise for 7 years. So
and
I agree with you. Right. So I agree with you. I like that kind of change and so forth.
Yeah, Discovery was actually better about getting people promoted, at least for like in rank, if not in job, than pretty much any other Star Trek. Like pretty much everybody at the end of that on the bridge crew was lieutenant commander, at least. It wasn't like, I was really speaking about Enterprise. That was one of the things that ticked me off is as much as they did in that show, they were still like you flash forward at the end and they're still all like ensigns and lieutenants.
Maria's not saying it.
Right.
Oh, sorry.
Right. You haven't seen it.
Cover your ears.
You haven't seen
I don't expect anybody to hold on to 23-year-old spoilers. It's fine.
Anyway, there were rank problems in other Star Treks. Let me just put it that way. And Ensign Harry Kim, as we all know.
Yeah. One question I had in the syndemic of the series and the season in the series, I've seen a lot of people talk about online, and it is what it is. And I posted today about Michelle Paradise. Some people say that the entire season was too much Michael Burnham focused and book focused. And of course, I read an interview and I posted with Michelle Paradise where she kind of much said, well, that's the story. It was Michael Burnham's story and they wanted to wrap up the book thing. So do we feel like the season, which follows the series, that was a little bit too much Michael Burnham? I mean, did we want to, obviously we wanted to see more people, but was a little bit too much on her journey, you think?
I don't know if it was too much on her journey, but I think that I would like to have seen Saru and Stamets and Tilly involved more. They were pretty big characters throughout the show. I mean, I've been recently rewatching season 1 and 2, and I mean, Stamets and Tilly and Saru are they're like the big four of Discovery.
Right.
What did you think, Maria?
Yeah, I think I would certainly have loved to have seen more of the other characters. I just, really thought that As I said, in the earlier seasons, they really spent so much time kind of crafting these very complex characters, and then you really don't get a lot of follow-up on him. I love Michael Burnham's character. I love Book's character. I think they work really well together. But I also feel like, to some degree, by the beginning of this season, she was somewhat established. I mean, yes, she's learned some stuff over the course of this season, but she was pretty well established in terms of, you know, where she was, who she was, what she was doing. And I think, and we kind of had a good sense for that. Whereas I don't know that that was true for some of the other characters, and I would have liked to have seen them change. And I mean, Stamets is a great example, because he changed so much from the very beginning of the series to even from the very beginning of the season to the, you know, he just the fact that at the very beginning of the season, he was like, you know, the Spore Drive program had gotten shut down, and he was like, what is my legacy going to be? And then at the end, he's like, okay, I guess you're right. We shouldn't use this technology, and I'm going to give up this thing that could have been my big, huge legacy. But I would have loved to have seen more of that journey, I think.
Yeah.
I agree with you, because I thought that was a really interesting character moment, a really good dynamic for him that never really got explored.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I think with once again, I'm going to blame the fact that it's a 10 episode season.
Right.
There's just only so much you can do. I love serialized storytelling, but it's not like back in the day when you could have, okay, this is a Burnham episode, this is a Stamets episode,
Right.
This is a Tilly episode,
Right.
This is a Culber episode.
Absolutely.
If we had 26, that'd be great. You know, we could really fully flesh out these characters. It's like one of the things. It's like with video games. I want crappier video games that take longer to come out, and they just they pay the people more to make them. It's like I want these shows to have more episodes that are like filler or like bottle episodes. You know, like I don't need the big special effects every single time. And you know, the human stories are really one of the best things about Star Trek. And you know, we don't have 187 episode shows anymore, so we don't really get to that. But I felt like they could have done more with Stamets, for example. Like they started off this season by saying, you know, oh, we're retiring the Spore Drive, and they're working on the Pathway Drive, and it's like, well, that just got left there, and I never saw anybody use the Pathway Drive. They immediately, as soon as they said they're retiring the Spore Drive, they needed Discovery to go jump somewhere. So really, maybe that retirement is a bit early.
Yeah, I think that Saru was using the Pathway Drive at the end. They mentioned it in dialogue, but it looked exactly like warp, and they made no differentiation between what Pathway Drive even is. But yeah, I could have used episodes with like Saru negotiating with delegates, or you know, Burnham and a Breen trapped on a planet together, like, you know, Star Trek episodes that would have fleshed out the story that we're watching.
Or even like those great episodes where they put two characters that you don't see together very often.
Right.
Like I think it was season 4. There was it, you know, with where Saru and Tilly, you know, go on an adventure together or whatever. Like those, like two characters you don't often see together, and how they interact together. I love those. Those are my favorite things, you know.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Lower Decks did really well the last couple of seasons, where they started to pair up characters in new ways, and you saw new things come out of those personalities because of that. And I think we didn't get any of that this season. There was a lot of episodes where it felt like the Michael and Book show, where they are off doing a thing, and that's the whole focus, and you don't really see what's going on the ship while they're doing that. But it's not a new dynamic. It's not anything that changes the way that you see these two characters, and there's nothing to get them to react differently.
Yeah, and it didn't even really seem like they had a lot of B plots. Like it was one thing. This was what they were doing, and it was a big thing, so it made sense that they had to do it that way. But there weren't any of those little moments, even, or you know, silly side plots that sort of fleshed out a couple of characters here and there, or whatever, you know.
Right.
Yeah, one thing that was a little bit different, that was a little B-plotty, was the introduction of Commander Rayner, and watching some of the characters play off of him, because he brought a little different energy to the show.
Yes.
I loved him. I mean, I love that actor, and I think he's just so good in general. I've loved him in everything he's done. But yeah, I really liked, and the change. I watched, just to prep for this, I watched the very first episode of this season, and just to compare, and the change in Rayner from the first episode to the last is fantastic. It's really really cool.
Yeah.
What do you think,
I would
Nick?
say that's the highlight of the season for me.
Yeah.
Was the introduction of Rayner and the way that his character arc flowed throughout the season. But at the same time, we're talking about how we felt like Saru and Stamets and Tilly are sacrificed this season, and it's almost because they're making room for Stamets. I mean, for Rayner.
Right.
Commander Weird Ears. For those of you who haven't heard that reference,
I like Rayner in much the same way as I like Captain Shaw on Picard. So you got you have Captain A-Hole and you have Commander Surly. I think it's a great introduction. It's like, oh, this guy's a jerk. I kind of love him. And then they tempered him over time, and he became a great addition to this crew. And like I said, they could do a whole spin-off season with him and with the new con officers and everything else. It'd be great.
Yeah.
I think that some of Michael's best moments in this season were her interactions with Rayner, where she is either confronting him or dressing him down or just putting up with his nonsense. I thought that Sonequa did some really good stuff in a lot of those scenes.
Yeah. It was a good challenge for her as a captain to deal with somebody as a subordinate who's kind of a wild card. You don't really know what he's going to do, and try to guide him to, become to live up to the potential that she sees in him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the fact that it was sort of her idea to make him first officer, so she sort of has to live with that, and you can see the moments where she's like, "Oh my God, I've made a huge mistake,"
If he messes up, it's on me.
Right. And I like the way thematically it brought her arc full circle from getting her second chance at the beginning and dealing with Lorca as a superior to then her being a superior over Lorca or over Rayner and mentoring him, which is you also don't often see a younger woman mentoring an older guy on screen on television.
Yeah, it was a good dynamic for sure.
Well, one of the reasons I did like that with Michael Burnham is one of the things people criticize the show and the character about is being too emotional. I'm sure you've heard that a million times. Michael Burnham's too emotional. People say she cried too much, blah, blah, blah. But what I like about it is it shows there's in real life and in this fiction, there's different ways to command. She doesn't have to yell. She doesn't have to raise her voice. She still comes off as really nice. There's no other way to use it. She's a really nice character. But we talked about, there was one episode where Rayner kind of made a little comment, and she just looked at him, and I'm just going to say this. I'm like, well, that's a black woman for you, because my wife's the same way. And she just looked at him, and she gave that little smile, and she didn't raise her voice, and that was end of story. You don't need, everybody doesn't have to be Jellicoe. Everybody doesn't have to yell. I like showing you have different styles, and as you guys are saying, Rayner's a little gruff. He's always going to be a little bit of an a-hole, but that's a style too, and it works. Different people have different styles. I remember even with TNG, Picard had somewhat of an arc because he was a bit of an aloof jerk when he started out in TNG. And when the whole season ended, he sat there and said, with the poker game, I should have done this a long time ago. So I like that Rayner is still Rayner, but he's a little different. Michael is still Michael, but she's grown a little bit, but neither one is exactly like the other. And I like that.
Well, our buddy Bill Lamond has just joined the show, and he agrees with you and says, yes, tough people can cry and they don't have to be nasty.
That's true.
Agreed.
Yeah. Agreed.
And I liked how they used Rayner to deliberately play against some of the things people have noticed about Star Trek Discovery, where he's telling people like, you can introduce stuff, but you only use 20 words. Because people complain that they talk about Star Trek Discovery, or at the end when he's like, "Cut the touchy-feely crap." Like that. I thought he was a good addition to the crew. And it's not easy to do, to introduce a new character and get that much screen time to him at the last season. Yeah. I mean, whether they knew it was last season or not. I remember even when I was in high school struggling with Ezri Dax, and then the last season of DS9 and the Dominion War, and we're going off to meet Ezri's family. Like, what are we doing? Are we spending time with this?
They did so well with him. It's like, I really wish I'd gotten to see that character in the next two seasons at least.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, agreed.
I think Discovery, when looking back someday, I think Discovery, I personally will feel this season and series, I think they will have excelled in the little moments. because for this entire 10 episode season, one of the moments I remember most strongly is the little time when Tilly basically confronted Raynor. And Tilly is so sweet and she's so nice, and she just kind of laughed and she said little stuff to him and she zinged him. And then later on, when he said something to her, she just kind of laughed at him and he laughed at her. And I loved that because Tilly was the kind of uncertain, goofy person. And she's still that same Tilly, but she also has grown. And I just love that. They had a very interesting, and it felt natural dynamic, Tilly and Raynor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you just remember the way that she would cower when Lorca came around. You know, like she would never have interacted with Lorca the way she did with Raynor. Just demonstrates how she's grown over the course of the series.
And then her taking that and using it to sort of mentor Adira, who's sort of in a similar situation where she's so super intimidated by being on the bridge. And she's like, no, you got this. Go do it. It's fine, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I remember that's a natural jumping point. Yeah. Am I lagging again? I guess I am.
Just a little bit,
very slightly. Yeah.
That's a natural jump point from this show into the Academy series that we know is coming. They not really confirmed yet that Tilly is in the show or the lead of the show or whatever, but we suspect that's the case because of all the building up to it that they've done in this season, especially. And if you think back to a previous season, the episode where she takes cadets on that away mission and she has to basically teach them how to survive in a hostile situation. She has so changed over the course of these seasons, and I think that's been really, really cool to watch.
Absolutely.
When I was a young man and I started corporate America, I remember I worked for Apple Computer, and I remember meeting executives, men. It was mostly men with great power, and I remember meeting some of these guys, and I remember thinking, this dude is not impressive at all. I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, they weren't as intelligent as I expected. They weren't as polished as I expected. But you know what they had? They had the position. And whether they deserved it or whether they were good in it, they acted it out. And I remember there's an episode, one of my favorite of TNG called, I think it's called Attached. It's when Picard and Beverly Crusher are telepathically bonded for some weird reason on that thing. And they were lost. And Picard goes, we're going, it's this way. And she goes, you actually don't know. You have no idea if it's the right way. And basically she's like, I'll be darned. You fake it. Well, he's the captain. He has to pretend to be confident. And I think that's what Tilly kind of learned too. You know, you don't know sometimes. You just basically you go into the room and people look at you and you got to pretend like you feel confident even if you don't. And I guess you fake it till you make it. So I love that about Tilly.
I wonder how much of that she learned from having to impersonate her mirror self.
See, there you go. There's another one. Yeah. She was faking. Yes. And even in TNG with Captain Jellicoe, the famous Captain Jellicoe, I remember there was a moment where Riker said, I'll say this for him. He's confident. And Troy said, no, he's not.
Right.
So, that's a lesson.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And at this point, I mean, they made a point at the end of the season to say that Tilly was the longest tenured professor in Starfleet Academy history. So now there's a Starfleet Academy show with no Tilly. That would be super weird. They better get the contract signed before they wrote that.
Recasted her. She's older now.
Right. Well, what do we think of the ending? I mean, we finally got to the end, like the MacGuffin, what everyone's looked for all season. Were you impressed with what happened? Whoever wants to go first.
I think it was not terribly surprising that they were like it's too powerful for one person to have. Right. I think it was pretty interesting, sort of her sort of working through that. And I think that, I think it made sense, right? And I don't actually think, I think they managed to do it in such a way that it wasn't a huge letdown, that they still were able to sort of close it out. I also think just in general, that last episode was beautiful. Like every second of that episode was gorgeously put together, which made a huge difference, I think, because you were you wanted that big, here's some big, beautiful, incredible, impressive thing. And at least we got that, even if they didn't end up taking it home with them, you know?
Right.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I feel like they did a few things with that ending that, like you were saying, they're not going to do anything with this power that's going to really shake up our Star Trek reality here. If we had another season to work with, they wouldn't want to set it up so that you have to deal with this moving forward. So getting to a point where it's like, yeah, this is not something we're going to use, but also doing it in a way where it shows that Michael was the right person to have that choice to make, and to be able to consider all the ramifications, and to even take something that she brought from Vulcan, the infinite diversity and infinite combinations. We've already got that. We don't need this technology. Let's go ahead and send it to a place where if you can pull it out of that black hole, you're probably pretty far advanced, and hopefully you can also pass these tests to get it. But they also they made it so that if in the future another Star Trek wants to go back and say, well, what happened before the progenitors, then you can still do that. There's still area to explore before the progenitors, and then there's still anything in front of Discovery in the future. So they did some interesting things with it for sure, and it was pretty.
Yeah, tying it in with Idic, I thought worked really well for the final season of Discovery, and for the big culmination of that's the big realization that she has is that we don't even need all this, because what it's for is to have what we already have. And I thought, because like Maria said earlier, like Discovery has been such an inclusive show and really highlighting the diversity, and I think that worked really well of sort of tying the themes of the show together at the end.
What did you two think about them going back to that well, going back to the progenitors and the chase for that technology as a season-long device for whether it be the last season or not, but it's used as a season arc for this show? What did you think about that choice?
I think this was one of the examples of how references are done right. Because, looking back, I actually did watch The Chase again, and it was a really fun episode. They're running around. They're doing, once again, the treasure hunt type thing, but they didn't really define a lot of it. And what they took for Discovery out of those last few minutes with Salome Jens as that progenitor was exactly what they needed from it. And it was something that I think expanded on things that have been established in Star Trek in the perfect way, and they just used it and they told a great story with it throughout the whole season. So I was very happy with it.
Yeah, I agree. I think as much as I love bottle episodes, I love adventure of the week, that's all great, but with any show like that's like Next Generation, you're going to have unanswered questions, and this was a huge unanswered question, right? Like, this is such a big idea that they just sort of threw out there and then never were able to get back to. And it was a very clear and logical thing for them to say, okay, we're gonna really dig deep into what this means. And I think they did really well to do it.
Yeah, and I think Charles
is. I was gonna say, I think The Chase is one of those episodes you watch and you wish they had a bigger budget and more time for.
Yeah,
because it ultimately they're standing around on the same rock set they always have with the same a Cardassian, a Klingon, or a Romulan.
Yeah,
and it's like
going to a bar.
And then it just sort of peters out at the end. It's like, hey, there's no big weapon here, and they're like, oh crap, and they all leave at the end, and then they just never mention it again. But I think that lends itself really well to being expanded into a 10-episode thing.
Charles, another big example. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say real quick, Charles. I think you did call out something very interesting. The very subtlety is Michael Burnham didn't just say, "Oh, it's too powerful for us." She said, "We don't need it." I can't say I've heard that before in any kind of sense. Usually it's like, man was not meant to have this power. We don't need it. That's different.
Pretty good. We already have everything we need.
Got one of those at home.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, we joked last week that it would still be funny if she goes back to headquarters and there's a Admiral there, like a Nechayev, that just dresses her down for getting rid of that power. Just lays
you did what?
Yeah.
It was interesting that entire conversation happened off screen. Like I suspect they had to cut it because of time, but it really surprised me that she didn't have the whole having to explain why this is so bad, and then also saying, nope, sorry, not interested. I'm still not going to do it. Even if you think I should, I'm still not going to do it, which I suspect is what happened. But yeah, it was funny that they was like, nope, I already talked to them. It's fine.
Yeah.
Well, Maria, did you have any final thoughts about Discovery season 5? Anything that we didn't cover that jumped out at you, or that good or bad?
I think in general, like I said, the sort of the themes of change, the themes of sort of losing everything and then finding it again, or finding meaning after losing everything, or it's so powerful the way that they keep coming back to that. The one thing I noticed when I was rewatching it is in the add-on scene at the end where they're showing Burnham way in the future, she's literally mending a fence at one point. And I was like, well, that's a really interesting metaphor to use.
I missed that completely. That's great.
Yeah, it was kind of cool.
What about you, Nick?
No, I was really impressed with the way that they handled it, and it just kind of shows the level of care that they have and the level of respect that they have for Star Trek in general, and how much love they have for this show and this universe, that they were able to do this. And thinking back a little bit to how they're picking up these things from the canon that's been established in these other shows. They also did it within their own season. Like when Culber had that experience where he was merged with Janal, that affected him for the rest of the season. And it wasn't like like in Deep Space Nine, oh yeah, Odo was Curzon Dax last week, but he's fine now. We're never going to talk about it again.
Or O'Brien.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Is like
O'Brien had so much trauma to deal with that he just didn't deal with.
Yeah,
right.
So they take care of the universe. They take care of their own characters. And they did it all in 10 episodes, and with a surprise, oh, you're done at the end, and they still managed to pull it off. So I'm super impressed with it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Alan and Keith, is there anything that we've talking to someone else? We've been talking to each other for 10 weeks about it, but did anything else strike you guys that you wanted to, in thinking back about the season, that jumped out at you?
I think, as I said, I don't know how I'm going to feel about Discovery in the future, but I think what Discovery will always be for me may not be the big moments and the big stories. I think Discovery for me may be a show with the little moments and the little characterizations. I remember more Book and Michael finally declaring their love for each other, not when they were pretending to be Breen and went into the hallway and had that crazy conversation. I mean, at the end of the series, I remember the little sly grin that Tilly and Rayner gave each other when they had met, they had reached an accord. I remember Saru and what is her name? Forgive me, his now wife.
Tarina.
Thank you. I love the way they look at each other. I just love those characters. I remember all the moments. I love the characters of Discovery. I don't know if I love the series, but I love the character. And I will say, we talked about doing a series retrospective, and Charles mentioned, well, let's get some distance. Let's think about it. And I think I'm going to need to, because Nick and Maria are just unabashedly loving the series. And it's nice to hear that. It's nice to hear that, because it makes me think about the show a little bit more in different ways. So I think having you guys on made me focus much more on the things I like about the show instead of hating them for what they did to the Breen.
It does watch differently when you are able to watch all the episodes at once. Like you can go through and watch, okay, I'm watching all of season 1, I'm watching all of season 2, versus, I don't know if you've never rewatched it before, you probably were like me, watching it whenever it comes out every week. So it's a different experience, and I think it lets you pick up on a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we did say that, we did say this was a 5-year show that took 7 years for us to watch, and then there was COVID and writer strike, so that it is kind of broken up and truncated. So I don't have a full connection to it like I have other shows.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I certainly had quibbles with it. There were a handful of things that I, definitely was not happy with, but overall, I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
How about you, Alan?
I think my answer is about the same as Keith's. There were big idea, story plot things that I didn't like. There were big plot story things that I did like. But the thing that I loved was the characters and seeing their interactions and seeing the development of a family unit amongst the crew, and a lot of the peculiarities of each character I really love. Seeing additions come in like Commander Reno. I love seeing the way that dynamic changes when new characters like that are introduced. And so I mean, like I have my favorite seasons and my least favorite seasons. And, you know, I had the same experience as Nick. I went back and watched season 4 before 5. And I found it a completely different experience being able to watch it in a more condensed setting than watching it week on week for 13 weeks, you know, and really enjoyed it an awful lot. So I can't wait to go back and watch the rest of it again, because I haven't watched 1 and 2 in, you know, quite a long time completely. And I loved season 2 and 3. I don't think I connected with as much, and I'm looking forward to revisiting it again to see if I find it different, being able to watch it in more of a binge than I did week on week when it aired.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you
How
guys
about you,
for joining
Charles?
us. Oh, me? Oh, I I forgot about me. No, I loved it. I've enjoyed it all the way through. I think there's only one episode this season that I didn't enjoy, and that's because of my Enterprise issues. The Starship, not the show. But no, I've enjoyed it. I've recently rewatching season 1, and I just started season 2. And yeah, I think the show works better as a binge. And also, I'm enjoying it more now that they've sort of tied Michael Burnham's story in more of a bow. Because for a long time for me, season 1 and 2 felt disconnected from season 3 and 4 because there's such a stark contrast there. But I really, the Face the Strange episode I've been raving about since it aired. That's my favorite episode of Discovery now. But I think that one really sort of tied all of Discovery in. Together and made it all feel like one story that's going someplace. I've been enjoying the rewatch for that.
It almost feels like it was the proper series finale.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us.
Yeah,
This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Maria, tell us where we can find the Enterprisesplaining podcast and what that is, and where we can people find more of you.
Sure. So Enterprisesplaining is a podcast where we talk about Star Trek Enterprise, which nobody is doing because it's a 21-year-old show, but we are right on the cutting edge, guys. No, there's 3 of us, and every episode only one of us actually watches the episode and then explains what happens to the other 2. And it's super fun. We are Enterprisesplaining on most social media, except for a couple of places where we're Enterprisesplain.
And I will say it is super fun to listen to. I've been listening to every one of your episodes, and if anyone listening to this podcast knows my opinions of Enterprise, that's saying something that I'm listening to an Enterprise watch along podcast.
Oh yeah, and we're not really the hugest fans of the show. I stopped watching it when it first came out because I just couldn't do it. I just disliked it so much. But I've heard it gets better, so we'll see.
And it's funny because I love Enterprise and I love it more with time. And so when I listen to your podcast, it's hilarious. I'm like, how the heck is somebody going to watch a show and nobody's watched the show and explain it? And it's hilarious to do what you guys.
It's so much more fun.
It's crazy.
Well, Nick, I imagine you're busy right now getting ready for the DragonCon Trek track. You guys are getting ramped up. Where can people find more of what you're up to, and what can we look forward to with the Trek track? If there's anything you can give away.
Yeah, so absolutely. You can find me on almost all the socials at Nick the Wright. I also do a webcomic. It's coming back pretty soon at treadingground.com, and I'm very, very deep in DragonCon, which is happening very soon. And I keep seeing those days crank down. It's like, oh no, I'm not ready. But we're running and we're going to have the Subspace Rhapsody sing-along this year, which is great. I think I already mentioned that Veronica's going to be on that doing the And one thing I'm doing this year again is it's the Salamander Awards. It's going to be our 3rd annual Salamander Awards. It's going to be the best of the worst. So basically, we get suggestions from our Trek Discord and a couple other places for candidates, and then we go through and we put them in kind of a March Madness bracket, and we come down to see what one is the best of the worst. And we're looking for things like campy but not bad. So like Sub Rosa won the first year from TNG. It was the episode where Dr. Crusher had relations with the ghost, her grandmother's paramour. And last year, Spock's Brain won, which is just a classic. So we're going to retire those this year, and we're going to, as an audience, as everybody on stage and in the audience, again, we're going to figure out which one's the best of the worst for the 3rd year. So lots of cool stuff to look forward to.
Alan Moran, 1, 2, 3.
Keith, where can people find more of you?
You can find me on X and Facebook, primarily the ESNO Network Facebook group.
How about you, Alan?
CosmicCreative.com. KOZMIC Creative.com.
And you can find me, as always, at feltnerdy.com or our podcast about the monkeys, Monkeying Around, where every week we talk about the monkeys. And Veronica's not here to do a closing. We didn't prepare. Does anyone want to jump out with a closing this week?
Bye.
I hear her closing in the background. She's laughing.
I heard her cackle back there. All right, everybody. See you
Thanks,
next Thursday.
Thanks.
What are we talking about next Thursday?
Star Trek.
Was it?
We do have a week coming up where we're not talking about Star
Was
Trek.
it All Good Things or The Voyage?
Next week
yes,
is
next week. All good things
to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the end of Next Gen. And since we're talking about series endings now, it ties in thematically. So
yeah,
be here next Thursday. I'm looking forward to revisiting that one.
Me too.
All right,
Take care.
everybody take care. Have a good week.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye.